In the state of Washington, a pastor is being criminally prosecuted because he wanted to be in the library like everyone else and witness the drag queen story hour. We're going to talk about this case in the second half of the show. But in the first half of the show, I want to talk to our Chief Counsel attorney, Kevin Snider, about a very important case that we have ongoing right now in the state of New York. Kevin, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you.
Now, Kevin, I understand that we're representing a group of parents of the Jewish faith in New York on a parents' rights and religious liberties matter, dealing with a private school, a Jewish school. Who are they and what's this about?
Well, PJI represents PURITE, which is an acronym for Parents Union for Religious Integrity of Torah Education. And PURITE is an organization located in New York comprised of Ultra Orthodox Hasidic Jewish parents whose children are enrolled in various yeshiva schools. Okay, so why do these parents feel compelled to form this organization, PURITE? Well, the purpose of PURITE is to protect the purity and integrity of the Ultra Orthodox Jewish Torah education. And these families and their educational choices are under attack by the state of New York. And these yeshivas it's a religious school. Their education is primarily religious. They study Torah and Talmud, but they take about 90 minutes a day to study what we would call the 3 R's. But the state of New York requires that education of a child in a private school and a homeschool be at least substantially equivalent to the instruction given to minors in the public school. So that's why they're fighting this.
Okay. Well, I can see people out there listening to this saying to themselves, well, what's wrong with compelling this private Orthodox Jewish school to have the same standards, meet the same standards as public education in the state of New York? What's the rub here? What's the problem?
Well, first, New York regulations require that yeshiva schools submit a syllabus, curriculum, textbooks, schedule of instruction, get this to the local public school district officials. Then students have to sit for state-approved standardized tests. And what's more, the private school has to send in quarterly reports for the approval of the public school, which if they don't like what they see, they can put the yeshiva school on probation. So in some, the public school sits as the authority over private schools. And the public school is is the financial and ideological competitor to private schools.
Yeah, I see this as very dangerous because we're talking about the government having the authority here to have to sanction what's being taught, and if what they want the private school to teach is divergent, perhaps from the values and beliefs and convictions of that private institution, we're trouncing upon religious freedom rights here. And we know for a fact that New York State, along with other states like California and others, have enacted not just reading, writing, arithmetic requirements, but also requirements dealing with social mandates, ideology, dealing from sex education to diversity and things that involve very controversial matters, morally very controversial for someone who believes in the teachings of the Torah, or as many people know as the Old Testament. I can see why they would be very upset about this. And yet also the government monitoring them, having to report to the government on a quarterly basis, and then examining these children with state exams and tests so they can scrutinize whether they like what the children are giving or learning in schools. I think that's very disturbing. So I can see why these parents would want to say something to the contrary. So Kevin, we're not just talking about one of these Jewish Orthodox schools. We're actually representing a number of these Jewish Orthodox schools, correct?
Right. There are parents who have children enrolled in many of these schools, and there are tens of thousands of them in the state of New York.
Now, how old are these schools? I mean, is this like just a new fad thing that came along and about 6 months ago, a year ago, and a new experiment? Or have these schools actually been around quite a long time?
Well, if you call 3,000 years a fad, then it's a fad. But we've had this type of religious training for obviously for a very long time. These Hasidic Jews had immigrated to the United States after the Holocaust, and so this country is their plan B, and to force them into doing things that would compromise their traditions and their faith, that's entirely reprehensible and inconsistent with what this country stands for.
Yeah. Now we're dealing with an institution that has been around for about 3,000 years. It's proven itself. It's been well tested. But no, the state of New York, that's not good enough for them. They want to control them and potentially squash them from being able to really even exist and have to be able to stay in the state of New York, and maybe even force them to have to flee somewhere else. But I don't know where they'd go, because the United States is supposed to represent religious freedom and civil liberties to the world. So this is very, very concerning, I'm sure. And now, Kevin, why do we believe that they would have a good chance of prevailing based on existing case law?
Well, there was in the early 1970s, there was a group of Amish that were criminally prosecuted in the state of Wisconsin, because the Amish would only send their children up through 8th grade, and after that they send them into the fields and raise families. And similarly, with these Hasidic Jews, they don't go into the fields. They're in mostly urban areas. They go into the trades and export, that sort of thing, run businesses and raise their families. They don't believe in having a college bound type of education. They actually believe that the secular academia is blasphemous, and so they don't want their kids exposed to that worldview.
Well, I have to admit, having gone through public education, both in terms of college and law school, there are definite times that I would consider it blasphemous on definitely more than one occasion. So I really don't think they're far off there. But even if I didn't see it that way, the fact is they have a right to their religious beliefs and convictions and to raise up the children in the way they should go. And that's what this litigation is about. I think it's also important to note, we've seen a shortage of young men and women in our trade schools. That is actually an area of great need. So I don't see how they could in any way discredit that, especially if it's proven to have worked and these kids are developing actual trades. They're not homeless on the streets. They're working. They go to trade school. They are very educated in their own right. They are taught at least one other language. We know. So this is not a sub-educational institution. This is actually an educational institution that is very rigorous, and it's something that has proven itself, and it's something that these kids growing up will be equipped to provide for themselves and their families. So when we step back and look at it, how can the state of New York actually think that they're going to prevail, especially with the case law you mentioned earlier?
Well, their thoughts they're very arrogant, and they believe that the state needs to control everything. And they obviously, if they're going, this is not just with these yeshiva schools. This is also with all private schools, Catholic schools, the Catholic parochial schools. In fact, when the state officials came to inspect their schools, the Catholic schools, to their credit, wouldn't let them on the campus. And this is also, the same regulations are being foisted on homeschooling families. So this is a real threat. And let's be clear, our position is that as a matter of principle, a child's parents, not the state, hold the rightful authority to determine whether their child is getting a proper education. And so we think that these people have the right to be left alone. There's still parental rights left in the state, and we look forward to giving them zealous representation in the months and probably years ahead.
I think it's interesting, Kevin, you mentioned not just Orthodox Jewish schools. You mentioned also private schools, parochial schools, even home schools are potentially at risk based on the outcome of this case. I mean, because this is what New York wants to do. It wants to control the educational upbringing of all the children in the state of New York. And seems to be the very obvious, blatant message. And if they get away with this, we're going to see other states probably try to emulate this and, in essence, attack the institutions that we've defended so successfully in the past of homeschooling and private schooling as well. Give us a timeline on this challenge to regulations as we represent these Orthodox Jewish schools. What's the timeline?
Well, the regulations, the time for public comment is over. We have submitted a lengthy opinion letter on that. In the fall, the regents, New York regents, are going to be meeting. I was contacted by the New York Department of Education, which told me that there will probably be changes to the regulations, and then they'll have another 45-day time frame for public comment. So we're encouraging people in the state of New York, if you're homeschooled or private schooled, whether you're going to a yeshiva school or not, you need to step up and make your voice heard. And again, if these bad regulations go through and they try to either prosecute parents, which they've done in the past, or try to shut these schools down, then we're going to go to court and fight back.
Yeah, and I know we have excellent attorneys, including yourself, to do just that. Kevin, I really appreciate the work that you're doing. And I think it is so important that we all keep these Orthodox Jewish schools and these parents in your prayers as we move forward.
It's really hard. It was surreal. It was very surreal. We were raided. I mean, I don't even know. I still don't know why.
I received a urgent call regarding a warrant that was being served on a Christian boarding school in Northern California. Approximately 16 California Highway Patrol officers armed with 2 canine units and 17 other investigators had appeared on this campus.
And they were lined up along the side of our road here. We're here to search every building.
I was shocked to see that it was an FBI style warrant. It was very broad. It had kick-down orders, meaning that the police could kick down doors.
It was out of a movie. It was unnecessary.
And there were a couple girls that were coming to me very upset and very emotional with the kinds of questions they were asking that were way too personal.
It was very agenda-driven question formulation. It was like they walked them into answering it a certain way.
The Department of Social Services started this process of getting this warrant against this school because of a tip, a hit piece from an internet tabloid. This is not a proper basis for a warrant to use 10-year-old information from hearsay.
They drove up to the front entrance and then came up to the office.
Our office manager and human resources has staff files. They had access to those. In the back is our student file room. The files that they were going through were student records, student transcripts, cumulative files, family history, vaccination records. It's pretty invasive.
The real bottom line motivation for this, we've discovered, is the fact that the Department of Social Services and those who are behind this raid were actually wanting to shut this school down because they knew it was teaching from a Christian biblical worldview.
A license with the state of California will force the school to give students the right to spiritual and sexual exploration. And that's something that a Christian school can't do. It's something that the parents who have enrolled their children in that school would not be in favor of.
I think what I love about the school is it's so unique. There's such a great need for this, I think, in our country and especially in our state. It's very loving, it's very creative, it's very sincere and authentic. It's just back to what's simple and important in life. I got saved here. My parents, my mom and my stepdad, ended up getting saved through this process too. I was very anti-Christian my whole life. Like the girl that would go through the classrooms in school and try and prove any Christian wrong. It was just the consistency of here, living it out, is what really sold me on these people in this place. We want to have a little bit of everything. There's not one shoe fits all for any kid, right? And we have this smorgasbord of people here with different talents, and we'd like to just utilize everything to give them the most optimal experience that we can provide.
The typical child that comes here, young one, is that of all teenagers, they got a little bit of rebellion in them. They've made wrong choices. In those choices, there's repercussions, but by coming to the school, they begin to learn what their choices can do if they make the right choice. And to be here on Parents' Day, when the parents come to see them and see the changes in their children, to meet some of the parents, to see the tears on their face when they see their son or daughter have accepted Jesus and they're different, it makes the time and what the school do here special.
Everything that's written into the fabric of this school and this ministry and its goals is good. And to have little things be twisted and be made to look bad, that's a tough one to swallow, especially when it comes from agencies that should be trusted.
You may have children in a private Christian school, or you may know people who have children in a private Christian school. This case law is the foundation that defends private Christian schools, period. That's how important this is. In fact, they could even stretch this to challenge the rights of parents with regards to homeschooling as well. Thank you for those of you who decide to be a part of our team in helping us in this very important hour in defense of freedom. And folks, if you'd like to support the Pacific Justice Institute, or we'd like to receive our regular updates, the Legal Insider, just go to our website. It's PJI.org. That's P for Pacific, J for Justice, I for Institute.org. It's PJI.org. And we have great resources there on our website, including opt-out forms. Folks, these are very valuable, very helpful to help protect your children in matters that are coming into our schools on a regular basis. Now, we have with us on the line Jorge Ramos. He's the attorney that heads up the Office for the Pacific Justice Institute in the state of Washington. Jorge, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you, Brad.
Now, Jorge, you've been representing, on behalf of the Pacific Justice Institute, a pastor who was being criminally charged for wanting to attend a public gathering at a public place, a public library, to observe, not create a disruption, but just simply to observe a drag queen story hour being delivered among the concern of many parents to some young children in that community. Now, he was, I understand, not given that opportunity. Give us some background as to what actually happened so people can understand what we're dealing with in this very troublesome situation.
So our client, Pastor Afhsin, showed up to the Spokane Public Library. He knew that they were going to host a drag queen story hour. He showed up with the intention of entering the library and either observing and or praying for the children and the parents who were taking their children in there. And when he showed up, it was very clear that the police officers were separating two groups, later to be identified by the policemen in charge there as pro-LGBTQ and those not for the event. And my client, being a pastor, was not for the event in the library, which instantly classified him as against LGBTQ.
So Jorge, he was wanting to pray. Now, he wasn't going to pray out loud. He wasn't going to put his hands on the children or put his hands on the parents. He was going to be there just quietly in his own mind, praying for the children and for the parents, creating no disruption at all, correct?
Absolutely.
And also, beforehand, he didn't have some sign he was waving. He wasn't screaming. He didn't have a megaphone, wasn't preaching, wasn't yelling. He just simply wanted to go in and watch. And the reason, and people need to understand this, the reason he was prevented from attending a public event in a public place advertised to the public was because they figured out that he must be a Christian and have religious beliefs that go against what they think is best and what was going on at the time. So because of his beliefs, because of his faith, he was treated differently and literally ordered to go on the other side of the street. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Our client didn't go to the other side of the street. What happened?
Yeah, so he was told by the police officer, get on the other side or we will arrest you. And him standing up for his rights, he said, well, you're going to have to arrest me. And this was after he requested, it's on video, I would like to go into the library. And the police officer responds, that's not going to happen. And he says, I would really like to. And the police officer responds, we know that's not what you want to go in there for. So it was implied by the police officer that he wanted to go in there to protest, which was not factual.
Right, and there was no evidence to support that at all. So
at all.
Yeah, I really am disturbed by that. I'd like to think that law enforcement was just making a mistake. Maybe they had some bad judgment there. But the fact is, Jorge, he was put in a squad car for 3 hours and then brought down and booked at the jail. And we haven't heard an apology. In fact, we have criminal prosecution continuing right now as we speak against this wonderful pastor who heads up a congregation, a church congregation there in the Spokane community. So Jorge, what's going on right now as we speak with regards to this pastor? He's still being criminally prosecuted, correct?
Correct. We were just in front of a judge on August 29th with our motion to dismiss. Unfortunately, the prosecution presented enough facts to not give the judge enough grounds to rule on our motion to dismiss. Our client is we're very optimistic that we're going to be able to get this dismissed. What the prosecution is arguing is that he was not barred from entry into the library for his viewpoint, but also at the same time, which I think blows this out of the water, is that they were concerned that if he were allowed in, he might cause a disruption. As you can see, that clearly shows they ruled on his viewpoint before letting him in. So the judge did rule and make several statements that were, if I were a prosecutor, I'd be very concerned to take this to court. So we are very optimistic and we're hopeful that they come to their senses before our trial date, which we don't know at this time, but it will be sometime probably in October.
Yeah, you know what bothers me about this? There's a number of things that bothers me about this. But one thing that really bothers me is the fact that there's almost an implied assumption that somehow ministers, pastors are unstable, mentally, emotionally unstable, that they don't have the capacity like the normal person to be able to sit civilly and watch that somehow this religious beast is going to come out and cause them to create a disruption, even though there's no evidence to support the fact that he had done anything in any way to give evidence that was going to happen. Just the fact that he had these beliefs, he was assumed to be someone who is going to create a disruption and be out of control. I'm floored to think that our law enforcement anywhere in the United States would have that kind of an attitude, and then to double down and not just mess up and violate his rights, but to double down and to be pushing this for criminal prosecution, because, Jorge, this isn't a light matter. I mean, what are we looking at in the way of potential punishment of this pastor? Is just a slap on the wrist, a $10 fine? What?
He was cited for obstructing a police officer. They will have to show that he willfully obstructed a police investigation. I believe once we show that he attempted to avoid their discipline by going into the library, there clearly was not willfully disrupting their shepherding of the people there outside the library. And he would face, I think the penalty is, the maximum is a year in prison and $5,000.
A year in prison and $5,000?
Yeah, and again, this is a man of high moral character. He has never been cited for anything else. I mean, he might tell you he has a speeding ticket or so, but again, no violent crimes, nothing out there that would warrant this kind of treatment.
Yeah. In the United States of America, folks, as we speak right now, we have a pastor that may end up spending a year behind bars and have to pay a $5,000 fine out of his pocket. He's a local pastor. They're generally not well off. That's a lot of money for a local pastor. And it's simply because he wanted to be treated the same. He wanted to be treated equal and not to have bigoted presumptions put against him to the extent that his free speech rights, his basic rights to be somewhere in a public place is violated. We're not even talking about his rights to speak or to express himself. His right simply to be quiet and sit in the same room of other people invited to a public event. This could happen to your pastor or your priest or your rabbi in public places where they're given this negative presumption to the extent that their freedom, their liberties are trounced upon and they're put behind bars. You know, Jorge, we have other cases right now pending at Pacific Justice defending pastors who are being criminally prosecuted because of their faith, because they express their faith. Right?
Correct, yeah. And we just got another case from our evangelist here in Kennewick, Washington. He was charged again for the exact same crime we exonerated him for in February of this year, and that was unnecessary noises outside of Planned Parenthood. Yeah,
his unnecessary noise was preaching. Preaching the truth in love. That was the unnecessary noise outside of Planned Parenthood, done in a public forum, in a public place, protected by the First Amendment. So this is the kinds of things we're facing, folks, at the Pacific Justice Institute. I want you to keep Jorge Ramos, our attorney there in Washington State, in your prayers as he defends this pastor and the other person engaged in open ministering who's also being criminally prosecuted. About 30% of our litigation budget is now going for criminal defense. And every one of these, quote, criminals are people who are being prosecuted for one thing, and that's because of their faith, for sharing their faith and standing behind their faith. And I encourage you to also support the work of Pacific Justice Institute as you feel led and called to do so as well. Go to our website, pji.org, pji.org. So folks, there you have it. It's our God-given freedoms we're talking about. Now, let's choose to keep them. I'm Brian Dacus, president of the Pacific Justice Institute. Have a good week.